Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube and listening, if you're listening to the podcast, I have another special guest this week. He is Matt, also known on Instagram as MattyC or the MattyC Collection. I think a lot of people have seen his Instagram handle and have seen his collection. But I definitely want to talk to him because I've always been very impressed by the stuff he's put in his Instagram account and just really wanted to get to talk to him about his history in the hobby and his collection. Matt, thank you so much for joining. It's a real honor and pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Well, let's just kind of get started with your history in the hobby. How did things get started for you?
Things got started for me back in '86. So I'll date myself. I'm born in '76. And so I was 10, and my two cousins, really good baseball players, significantly older than I was. And so I looked up to them, really admired them, and they were into cards big time. And so it just started with my cousin insisting on walking me down to the corner store on 11th Avenue in Brooklyn, New York, and buying a pack of '86 tops, and then pulling a good record breaker, and just I think that was the beginning of all I cared about was how cool that image looked. I loved the fonts, I loved the layout, I loved the photograph, and then obviously, loved the player, and that was it. And I was off and running, and then and 86 Topps Mattingly was another similar card, and just the aesthetic of it was just killer, and the stats and the player, and that was it. I was hooked from the jump, and it's the older I get, I think the more I like to do it because it keeps you in touch with your youth,
Yeah.
collecting does.
Yeah, there's definitely always that connection to your youth and nostalgia always plays a big role obviously in people's interest in the hobby. I believe there's just always something that at least draws you back into it. Was that what kind of happened to you? Did you kind of were drawn back into it later on in life like a lot of people?
Yeah, definitely. Towards the um, like sophomore, junior, senior of high school, I didn't.
Mhm.
Um, College, I didn't. But towards the end of college, I felt a little bit of the pull. My younger brother was working at a card store back home in Brooklyn, and
Mm.
I would go visit him, and you see things. And I think it was the first time I'd ever seen a Mantle rookie of 51. Bowman, the owner of the store, had it in like the velvet pouch and the giant screw down, and it was just so I began to feel the pull, and you begin to think as college is ending, it's like if I get out and I make money, I'd love to get, the things that we grew up idolizing, it's like the 52 Mantle, of course, or, I remember the 84 Fleer updates, Star Jordans, things, there were things that we would only see in card magazines, right? Um, I didn't see a 52 Topps Mantle until much later in life in the flesh. Um, so as college was ending and you begin to fantasize, like, if I get money, what would I get? It's like, yeah, you want an
Yeah.
apartment or this and that, but it was like, oh, I'd love to get like open. I remember one of the first things I did with my first paycheck was like bought like a vintage Miss Pac-Man arcade machine and a bunch of boxes of 1975 minis, like thinking of the thrill of like pulling a Brett rookie out of that, so that's what happened. Yeah, you get nostalgic, and you get nostalgic in a different way coming out of college because again, there are things that as a kid, you pined for that were nowhere, never in the cards. And the notion of owning any '50s Mantle, like even '56 would have been insane. Gaudy Ruth, stuff like that. So that was what. So when I got out of college, it was a little. I didn't get a chance to get back into cars. And after college, I was in LA a lot and back and forth between LA and New York. It was once I got settled in, then I got back into it, and I've been back into it ever since.
And when would you say you kind of started really focusing, honing in on your vintage collection? Because that seems to be the stuff that you've kind of mostly focused on. Correct? Is vintage?
Yeah. Vintage. It was always vintage. It began, with the '70s and '80s stuff. Um, those were the things that I coveted and loved, but also knew very well. things that were and 60s, 64 Rose was a card I always loved, 68 Ryan. The 50s stuff, again, it was interesting because once I forget when it was, but I remember it must have been. So I was really into collecting the 70s cards. For years, I had only been building a 75 mini set. Um, that was sort of how I got into understanding the grading situation. And then what happened was it's almost like an epiphany. I went to a card show one day here in the Southern California area, and I'm walking around, and I was like, I could buy a 1953 Bowman Mantle. I could buy a 56 Mantle. Like I could do this if I wanted. And I loved them and looked at them. And I was like, what's stopping me? I'm just going to do it. And those are the first two I bought in terms of vintage cards, just because again I always loved the way they looked. And you begin, it's gradual because those to me at the time were I couldn't imagine like, well, I'm spending $3,400 on a card. You kind of dip your toe in, just like with anything in life. Things that seem, things you think you might not do, all of a sudden you can do them, and you get more comfortable. You gain more knowledge. You talk to people who are doing it. So as I began to branch out, and then I wanted to learn more, for example, about not just the Mantles, but some pre-war Ruth. Shoeless Joe, Cobb. I wanted to learn more. So you begin to seek out collectors with collections that you admire, and then you make their acquaintance, and then you ask them questions, and you absorb that knowledge. And then with acquiring more knowledge comes confidence to buy, right? And so you go, oh, that's not so crazy, and and I'm going to go for a Gehrig, and I'm going to go for me. I really like the Yankees, and I like collecting players that I grew up watching or that I read about or read about and come to admire that way, that embody excellence in its different forms. I'm a big, performance and winning that I'm very fascinated by that period of the Yankees where they were just so dominant. And so that's how it grew. And I began to buy more and more and get more and more comfortable. And I remember the first time someone told me, one of the collectors that was advising me or mentoring me, I should say, said, hey, you really need to get this card. It was a Babe Ruth rookie, which was then at the time $15,000. And I remember thinking, like, I could never spend $15,000 on a card. That's crazy. I wouldn't know what to do. I'd be shaking. And then, of course, I would buy one much later and have to pony up a lot more. I should have listened to that guy. So that's a little bit of a description of how you wade in, you get your toe in, and then you just keep going and going. But you're buoyed by confidence that comes from knowledge of that you're gleaning from other collectors.
Yep, absolutely. And I can't help but notice that it's not just vintage stuff, but you've also dipped your toes into signed vintage. Isn't that correct?
Yes. Well, I kind of always noticed that on 52 Topps cards they had a facsimile signature. I mean, that kind of indicates right there that an athlete signing the card would be the ideal state of the card. And like with anything, you have to get knowledge to feel comfortable and to feel confident. And so I began again looking. The process is very organic. I would admire. I befriended a gentleman who had a signed 52 Topps Mantle. I befriended someone who became a mentor to me in the hobby for many years. A guy named Joe who we would talk a lot about signed vintage. He has like a signed Gehrig rookie and signed Gowdy Ruth, and I would ask him, so what makes you feel confident in these pieces, and how do you know, and educate me, because clearly he's comfortable doing it. And so as that knowledge got acquired, it was for me ideal to think that the athlete held this piece and touched this piece. And I'm a big fan of the aesthetic. I like the beauty, big fan of graffiti art. And so I see beauty in that, in especially a stylish signature, but like boldly struck on the card in the right place. And so that creates, it it's like a whole that's greater than the mere sum of its parts. You know, it's like 1 + 1 equaling 10,000 to me when I so it's not, I don't just collect signed vintage. It has to, the whole piece with the addition of the auto has to really look right to me.
Sure.
And there's no real, it's hard to articulate. You just know it when you see it.
Yeah.
And then I really like those pieces.
Yeah. I got into collecting signed vintage basketball several years ago, and it's been a lot of fun. One of the things that I talked about when I first started doing it is just I love the aesthetic of seeing, in particular, like a vintage ballpoint pen signature on like a classic NBA card, like 61 Fleer. They really look like the Topps baseball cards of the 50s when you have like a
Yes.
really cool looking ballpoint pen, and just aesthetically it just looks really cool because really, yeah, really takes you back to like the 56 Tops or the 54 whatever style with the facsimile autos and everything. But so hey, yeah, having that actual auto on there is really cool, and aesthetically just makes the cars look a little bit better in my personal opinion. And
When it's right, it's right.
yeah, and then you go down all sorts of rabbit holes about true rarity and a lot of those signed pieces, and just really almost like you're connected to the actual history of those cards and those players from that time period. And you add all these things because, like you said, you would think that like more and more people it would have been more popular to have 52 Topps signed back in the day, but not very many people thought to get those cards signed back then.
Well, also you had to think that if you're talking about someone in 52 taking a 52 card, there wasn't an auction, an autograph circuit,
Right.
right? There weren't shows, so you had to hunt down that athlete, or mail it to him later on in life. And by that time, you probably might have lost your 52s, or you might have, now it's 63, and you've got a 63 that's your new card that you love, and you'll get that signed. So it's I also love the fact that something you were touching on seconds ago was that I love the notion that someone loved that card and that athlete
Hmm.
to get it signed especially the ones that are signed. Well, even in the autograph circuit days, but even before, if you go playing days or if it was signed pre-autograph or outside an autograph in person, that kind of thing. To think that this card meant a lot to somebody,
Yeah.
and they really had a connection to the athlete to find it and bring it to them again, even if they paid for it at a show. That means a lot. That I like that dimension to it.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things you can learn about the history of that player who signed, why he did and didn't sign for a while, the reasons how that card might have gotten signed. I think you have a really interesting story about one of your big vintage signed cards. Isn't that correct? Or one of the stories that you believe be true about one of the big pieces in your collection, correct?
Yeah. That's if from everyone's budget's different. If I'm going to go to the top end of my allotted, when I'm being responsible, budget, I really insisted or dreamed of provenance. That for
Yeah.
me is really important. Very hard to get. I had abstained from some cards that had tempted me. I knew this particular piece existed because there was an article on it back in 2017 with the gentleman who got it signed. It was in Forbes, and I just remember loving the article and the charming old man and the story, and it was everything I wanted. Now at the time, it wasn't in the cards for me, no pun intended. And I always said, if an opportunity for that one came up again, and it did, and I did the research, and that was that one. And so yeah, I was able to date the exact date of signing. It was signed on. It's a 52 Mantle, and it was signed on Friday, March 29th, 1968, because it was signed. The gentleman in the article, they said that it was signed at a White Sox versus Yankees spring training game in Sarasota, and so I was able to buy an original copy um, of the White Sox spring training schedule, and they only hosted the Yankees one game in Sarasota, and that was Friday, March 29th. So to be able to have that article and have that other piece, and to know that that was the day. And then, of course, the article got into how he got to meet the Mick and who introduced him to the Mick. So it just became, it transcends grading and authentication, and it's just who got it signed. And the coolest thing for me about that card is that the guy who, and it shouldn't be surprising, the guy who got it signed in '68, he also got it signed with a 51, which I'd love to track down one day. But the guy who got it, that's my other dream now. But the guy who got it signed, he was the one who pulled it from a pack.
Oh, wow.
So you know who pulled it, who got it signed, when, where, how. And what I also, this specific piece I love. It's interesting. My brother's a big Jordan collector, and he's got a pair of signed Concords, signed 11s.
Nice.
And Provenance. He's got, so they were from Kobe Carl, George Carl, the Hall of Fame coach's son. And that alone, because there's 2 Kobe best wishes, that alone is like Provenance, great,
Yeah.
But he's got a video from George Carl to him saying, "Hey, Greg, I heard you got these sneakers that I got." So, which takes it, again, transcends. But what's interesting, the reason I bring up those sneakers is that Jordan signed these sneakers, one of them, in an interesting place. He signed it more on this, like the mesh area, and then bleeding onto the leather.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a bit awkward. There was a bit of an awkwardness to it. And then the other shoe he signed all on the leather. And my brother and I were talking, and it really seems like this was probably the first pair, one of, if not the very first pair of Concords he signed, because you can see the athlete wondering, where do I sign these? How do I sign this piece? And all the other Concords are all signed on the leather except for this pair, which we know is legit. So it's probably like he's handed the Concord, he's picking up his Concords. He's like, well, what do I sign it? And so this Mantle card, he signed it to the right of his face in the blue. And he also wrote best wishes. Now he was on, and so it's the only Mantle, this card you asked about, that was the only 52 Topps Mantle that was signed when he was a player, of the 19 that have surfaced. Is it possible? Sure. Very slim, because someone would have had to find him when he was the most popular player on earth and somehow decide to bring a 52 and find him and somehow get him to sign it. Good luck with that. And if it exists, it's got to surface. But point being that he signed it in a way that he didn't sign any of the others.
Yeah.
And obviously it's his period signature, because his signature evolved very distinctively over the years. His early signature looks very different than his late 60s, which looks very different from his autograph circuit, 80s and 90s days. But he wrote it in this area where you could almost see him like going, well, gee, where do I sign this? Oh, I don't want to be on my face. I want to put it over here. So again, that speaks to how early it was in his signing it. I was talking to one of my best friends, the mentor Joe, and he was saying, this is probably the first 52 Topps Mantle that Mantle ever signed. So having those stories, really that's what collecting's about to me. Whether it's the story of you pulling it from a pack in '86, or the story of, I have a Darryl Strawberry that he signed for me when these bodyguards, like he needed bodyguards in '86, but in '86 these bodyguards we went to my local church for a show, and the bodyguards were like, "Sorry, kid, I had handed him 2 '86 Topps." They're like, "Sorry, kid, only one per customer, one per ticket." And I spent like $20, to have him sign. I think he'd sign too. And he looked at them, like he turned around and looked at the bodyguards like, what are you doing? This kid's 10 years old. He's like, what's your name, kid? Give me both. So, I mean, whether it's that story, the story about the Mantle, like that's what makes these things cherished in our collections, and why ideally we'll pass them on, and relay those stories to our heirs. That's what it's about. And that's what it's about to me. We've been talking about this one card you asked. Now I've been rambling on for how many minutes? For me, it's not like, it's this rarity and it'll go up, and this versus this is an investment, and it's like money. That's way, we'd have to talk for a few more hours before it got to that.
Right. No, yeah, but that's definitely, the provenance stories is definitely one of the components that I find extremely fascinating when it comes to signing the sign vintage stuff in particular. Because, yeah, I mean, there's so many. I think just the fact that the fact that there weren't too many people in the time period that had the foresight to think about, yeah, we need to go and get all these 52 tops signed because these 52 tops is going to be the most popular set of all time, and we
Mhm.
got to get Mickey Mantle to sign these because he's going to be the most popular card that's ever going to exist. But that one person just had to have it, and no one else was obviously doing it at that same time period that he did. So it's just amazing that he did it in that time period, and it's stayed.
Yeah.
It still exists, and stayed with him for a while, and it eventually got to your hands. Incredible story, and just a couple things real quick. First, to harp on the fact that it's well known, obviously, that Mickey Mantle signed a ton throughout his
Oh yeah.
pro swing days. His signatures are out there. They're a dime a dozen. Yeah, but yeah, I think you said the number. There are only 19 known copies of a signed 1952 Topps card, and I think only 20 or so known of his 51 Bowman. And the rest of his 50s cards, it's about the same. They're very low pop
It's not a
numbers.
lot.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
really aren't a ton out there, and I think once again it speaks to people not realizing, like, not having the foresight, because how could you know back then that 52 tops and 56 and all these sets would be such a big deal, and especially to have these Hall of Famers signing them, because not very many of them actually signed them. Even those who did autograph circuits later on in life, not many of them signed those cards still during that time period.
Well, there's so
So
many things to give them to get signed. That's a big issue. Is let's say it's 1964, right?
mhm,
You're not unless you're what in 1964, what boy or fan is planning or knows for sure that they're going to meet the Mick. I mean, it's like
yeah.
that's not something that happens often. If you get the opportunity, it's a ball, it's a piece of paper, it's and even on the auction circuit, excuse me, the autograph circuit, there's so many things then to bring. There's
Yeah,
photographs, there's bats, there's
there's
balls, and there's so many cards.
Yeah, there's a ball you
So
can buy for $5 and get it signed by Mickey Mantle for like $50. Yeah, that's the way that most people are going to do it. Of course.
yeah. And once he retired, you have 51 through 69,
Yeah.
right? Plus all the all-star cards. So if you, and plus, so add to all those different cards, all the different memorabilia you could get signed from him.
Hmm.
So spread around, it's not like there's a lot of them, maybe some of the later 60s pieces. Those were signed, later, because again, it would make sense given the age of when the fans were buying those cards out of packs. Those would be the ones that they had. And fast forward to the 80s, early 90s before he passed away. So that's why probably there's more of the 68, 69. So
Yeah. So to have yeah, so yeah, and so to have an actual playing day signed 52 tops card, really incredible. I can imagine that card has gotten a lot of attention over these past couple of years. I mean, I'm sure you've had people reach out to you, be like, "Are you ever going to sell that?" Or "What's your plan with that?" I mean, I'm sure it. Yeah, that's one of those things. That's one of those really truly special pieces. I feel like that's out there in the hobby.
yeah, and the playing, it's there are a lot of collectors of these pieces that sign vintage pieces. It's been going on for a long time. There's look at different quarters, like you take social media, for example. Um, a lot of the guys I know that have been into it for a long time, who are a decade or more older than I am, and whose knowledge I benefited from greatly over the years conversing with them, they're not on Instagram. They're not on chat boards, right? So they're collecting, they're building their collections and loving their collections. So my point being that there are a lot of collectors of this stuff that know about it, know the significance, the greater desirability, if possible, right? They're interesting wrinkles because we could compare, if possible, I was about to say a playing days auto, but it still has to be a pretty piece, right? You can't, I'd probably rather have a beautiful overall piece, card centered, autograph, bold, wet looking, in a great place than a playing days if the playing days was really, really faded or in the wrong location, or if the card had a big crease across his face. So they're interesting nuances, and that's all individual collector preference for sure. But the outside that group of collectors that has been hotly pursuing and and amicably, collegially competing with each other for these pieces at the Heritages, the REAs, the memory lanes of the world, those the sort of premier auction venues. Now we're seeing the knowledge disseminate more widely. We're seeing the knowledge get out there of even in a video I had seen that showed the card I wound up purchasing because it was at the National, and there was a video I saw from the long time established sellers, who they were talking about the importance to them when they purchase of for their collection and for their inventory of playing days autos. So that may get out, right? So as the knowledge gets disseminated there, that can increase popularity. Again, I'd rather it not, because there are others I want. Let it happen after. I think that's another thing. The really real is that collectors want prices down. We don't want like up, up, up and away. I don't want that. I wish I could have paid a fourth of what I paid for that card.
Yeah. Is that your favorite piece, or do you have another mantle piece that's your favorite piece, or any other vintage pieces that kind of stands out to you?
I really, when I look at my collection, I really do love them all. There are days where I will look. I just got a signed '87 Fleer sluggers from the left side with Don Mattingly and Darryl Strawberry, signed in their playing day primes. Because I know I have Strawberry's '86 signature that I got in person, and it matches up. And so I put this. They must have signed it around '87, '88, maybe. And it was clearly in person somewhere, maybe an All-Star game or something, because the auto's kind of faded. I will look at some of the Mantles, and then I'll look at that just as much. I'll look at I'll look at an '86 Sport Flick sometime, because it takes me back to the candy store where I bought it. Remembering childhood. So I love them all. I would say certainly up there for me is my signed '53 Topps Mantle, because I can make a strong case that might be and for me, it's all subjective. I think that might be the prettiest signed '50s Mantle card, individual copy in the hobby, because I've seen almost all of them, and the way the card looks, it's a 2.5, but it's very well conditioned. It hits the eye right, no creases. It's just corner wear. It's well centered. And you have this auto that he did, clearly post-retirement auto, that is just, he nailed it. It was before the first martini of the day, and he crushed it. He crushed it. He put it in the right spot, and the Sharpie was flowing, and he just nailed it. And so I love that piece. I also love, I have a '52 Topps Mantle that's unsigned, that I like the rarity of a signed card that's beautiful. I also like rarity in the sense of centering, when of course the image is there, right? I don't want a centered card if it's blurry, right? I don't want a centered card if it's got a crease right across the face. So obviously the image has to be there, but then I want the image framed. So I have one that's centered, and there are very few of that card centered. It's almost always tilted or always pushed on one side or two sides. And what's special about that one is I got very lucky. I also know the name and met the person who pulled that one from the pack. So to have a '52 Mantle that who pulled it from the pack and it's centered, that takes that one to another level for me. And that one was a real triumph of eye appeal over technical grade, because I was approached by the Louisville Slugger Museum several years ago, and they put it was the headliner of the official Topps exhibit at the Louisville Slugger Museum. So it was on loan there, and it was a lowly 4.5, but they wanted one that was framed. They're like, we don't want a 7 or an 8 that is crooked, so it was great to see that aesthetics prevail in some place.
That's pretty amazing. And it's amazing congratulations for having those in your collection
Thank
now.
you.
This is some pretty amazing cards. I mean, I know people are dreaming of just owning one mantle, 52 mantle in their lifetime, and you've got two pretty special ones. It sounds like so. It's great to hear. Yeah.
Thanks. Oh, anytime you get your hand, I remember when I got my first one. It was a tilted 3. I remember calling home like, "Honey, there's something coming in the mail today. You better take care of it," because I was out, heart beating, waiting to come home, opening it up, hold it. I remember holding it like, "Oh my God, this is what it looks like." It's just that there's something. Never saw him play. I mean, again, big fan of the Yankees, knew him that way. But if you were a card collector growing up in the '80s, that's the stand that and the wagon, the standard bearers of the hobby. It becomes iconic. It takes on uh, an iconic status, and it's a symbol of cards and the hobby and thing you pine for as a kid or looked up, that was an exalted state. And so anytime you can hold one, it's a thrill as a collector for sure. There's a bunch of cards that are like that for everyone, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Well, to be a vintage collector and a vintage sign collector throughout the years, there's a lot that you have to learn about what's real, what's authentic. There's been a lot of stories happening in the hobby recently. You and I kind of spoke briefly on before we started recording that I feel like you have a lot of thoughts on, and I'll give you some time to kind of let your thoughts out in terms of all the stuff that's been going on in terms of putting into question the way things are authenticated, not just with the grading companies like PSA, DNA, but there's lots of things happening now with game used memorabilia, obviously. So,
Mhm.
what are your thoughts about all the stuff that's been going on? Obviously, the hobby, no shortage of of drama. There's been a lot of drama here just recently.
No.
Yeah. So,
Look, I think anywhere there are humans, there's going to wind up being drama. And anytime there's humans and money, there's going to wind up being some form of nefarious activity. I think so that happens. That's going to happen. That's the human condition. So it doesn't shock me or surprise me. With regards to now, I'm not big game used. That's more my brother's province, purview. But the from what I've understood, and I'm always hesitant to talk about what I don't know. When I feel on solid footing, when I feel I have a lot of knowledge about something, then I'll open my mouth. I really don't like to. What's that famous saying? Better to be quiet and be thoughtful than open your mouth and remove all doubt. So
right.
I try not to. You're not going to catch me opining on investment potential of modern cards, right? That's not what I'm into, and I'm not. I don't teach their own, man. I'm not going to do this what someone else does, and especially if I don't know anything about it. Now that said, what I feel like I have understood about that situation, I'm glad that if what comes out of it is that the authentication process for game use stuff tightens up and protocols are embraced by the industry, such as insisting on using original negatives, right? I think that's a net positive. I think that's how we move forward. So I think that's great. I also think, and I got to give my brother credit for this, is he says provenance trumps a photo match. Again, if you can do research and do the homework on a piece you're targeting and get to know who owned it, where did it come from, the source. That's like him with his George Carl shoes. I mean, you don't need a photo match, right? You got George Carl saying, what I tried to do with the 52 mantle, right? That's why that card gives me such peace of mind, because it's like, here's an article with the man who signed it and the story. And um, as again, I'll refer to my friend Joe a lot. He says, the story is very important. Being able to know it's, the Uncle Jimmy sign cards,
Mhm.
the Uncle Jimmy sign cards that again, there's an article, there's news about this collection, about this man and how it got it signed. That's why I jumped for my 52 sign mantle. So if you can get to know that stuff, it immunizes or inoculates a piece from those kind of shenanigans. But that said, it's about tightening things after, right? And it's happened in every section of the hobby. We saw it with the unopened pack fiasco with those GI Joe things. I mean, that was wild. We saw it with unopened Stello packs with stars on top. There was a guy making them somewhere out of Southern California who was getting them by the goalie. We've seen it with trimmed cards, right? We saw it with some T206 signed cards in the past. There was some fake autographs. Nothing's immune. It's about rigorously tightening standards and about acquiring knowledge, really knowing, and that comes from really seeking out veteran experienced collectors, talking to them. Why are you comfortable, like my friend Joe, why are you comfortable spending 2, 3, 400 grand on this particular piece? Are you concerned about this? Are you concerned about that? No. Great. Why? Tell me why. And so seeking out good sources of information, not some self-anointed pundit, right? On with a hot take, not these hot take artists on social media, but really vetting and putting time in to seek out, who do I want to trust on this topic? Who do I think has the knowledge on this topic? What does their collection look like? Have they bought significant pieces? Right? And then I'm going to, if I admire the collection, obviously, hopefully the person's really nice to talk to. And generally, collectors are a great group. They want to share their knowledge. They want to share their expertise. So I think that's what's going on now. And what you asked really dovetails with this, or into this subject, segues into this subject of who is the source of information, right? Who are collectors talking to? And it's very easy, right? Humans, were lazy creatures. It's very easy to go to McDonald's, right? It's very easy to listen to some hot take on Instagram. It's harder to seek out, find a great collection, make contact with its owner, who may not be, likely not a social media guy, right? Develop a rapport with that person, get knowledge from that person. That's harder, but it's going to lead to a better education and then more confidence, which is how we arm ourselves to not get duped, right? So that's where I come out on.
Exactly. Yeah. Acquiring education is key. Getting that connection with other collectors, like you said, is really vital, especially when it comes to the further back you go and the rarer the stuff you're trying to accumulate, whether it's signed vintage or even just other really rare sets or oddball things or inserts, whatever, that are very hard to come by. You don't find them on auction sites and eBay, and for a reason. It's like these are really guarded very, very, very passionately by true collectors. And you have to talk to them also to know a good sense of what they will wind up going for, because you're not going to once again find like public auction information for a lot of these items that we're talking about. You have to just know people who have them, or people who have had them in the past, and have that knowledge base of what their value is, and the actual rarity of them, and how often they come up for sale and things of that nature. It's the true collectors of these things that really have that knowledge that you're not going to find just by going to eBay or 130 Point or Card Lab
or Instagram. I mean, you've got there, and what's interesting is, and again, what are we giving attention to is important. I mean, let's get really real. If you walk down the street and you see someone defecating in the street, you're going to move on. You're going to walk on by. You're not going to put a camera in that guy's face and go, "Hey, tell me what you think. I value your opinion." Right? So I think that, I mean, I know that's a pretty rugged analogy, but I point out there's some really great collections on Instagram, right? Whether it's type 1 photos, whether, and there are a couple names, I don't know if they're comfortable me saying, but the guys who have phenomenal. There's a guy who I admire so much. He's got phenomenal early signed Cobb photos with inscriptions. It's just like stunning museum quality stuff. And like, this guy has like a small fraction of the followers of some hot take artist that's spewing shit that, like, doesn't know that a 51 Bowman is Mantle's rookie card, and he's like, "This is my pick," or and pass on this and whatever. And meanwhile, guys with the knowledge that could really help people and pass on aren't getting queried, aren't getting sought out, aren't. So a lot of that is on the audience, and what are we choosing to give our attention to? What are we giving our oxygen to? Right? Things that it's almost like it's cheap drama versus seeking out really good, nutritious knowledge. Right?
Yeah. And the obviously the story we were talking about referring to earlier has to deal with the Instagram account card porn and passing over game used memorabilia piece with My Gray. Card porn obviously received a huge Instagram following, over 100,000 followers, whatever. And it's things like that where he's getting a lot of attention for his social media accounts and what he talks about with the hobby. And unfortunately, and as it turns out, he was a phony and actually didn't really know what he was talking about. He was just pulling over a bunch of fast ones over a lot of people in this hobby. They'll have a lot of ramifications probably going forward. It's not just about that one particular game used memorabilia piece. It's a lot of stuff over the years that he's passed on to unsuspecting buyers, unfortunately. And it's just one of those things of like, well, it turns out he wasn't a true collector. It turns out, he was just a shyster, a phony. Just because he had over 100,000 Instagram followers doesn't mean he was the real deal, And I think that's
not at all
a great example of who to listen to and who to actually, go to when it comes to finding out if things are truly real and truly worth buying from particular people.
Yeah, how does that guy have 100,000 followers of alleged card collectors on Instagram, right? Or you have other guys that people send me hot takes from, right? I think just to kind of like trigger me for fun, friends triggering me for fun with things that people will say. But it's like, who's giving that bad uneducated take attention when I could just think of these two guys I follow on Instagram who have such fascinating, outstanding collections. And these guys, it's like these guys should be followed. These guys should be having their opinions solicited. They're not out there spewing hot takes about things they don't know about for attention. They're out busy being successful and finding awesome pieces. Like, we should be following those guys. We should be asking those guys, hey, tell me about this signed Cobb photo you have. Tell me about this insane raw 51 Mantle that they got. One of the guys who just got, I think he recently got a grade. It came back at 9.5, but he got the card raw and knows where it came from and has prominence. Like let's put the camera on that guy. Right. Let's put the camera on my friend Joe, who's got the signed Gehrig rookie and an Uncle Jimmy Ruth, and ask him, why do you love these pieces? Why are you comfortable spending a ton on these pieces? The answers we get from a Joe or from that other guy, that's nutritious, right? That's quality information. Not card porn and the rest. So I think, onus has a lot on the audience. What's the audience seeking out and choosing, right? More people going to McDonald's than going to Luger's, that's on them.
Yep. Lots of empty calories on social media and YouTube for sure. Yeah.
That says it perfectly.
Yeah. And to also go back real quick on some of the things you talk about when it comes to really, knowing how to go out and get certain rare items and signed pieces, for instance, and, just having that knowledge base where you can even just go out and make your own decision and not relying so much on other parties in this hobby, because other parties still get it wrong. Even the most professional, like PSA and obviously this My Gray company and BBCE, they've all gotten things wrong in the past. And so, you kind of have to have your own knowledge base if you really want to do this, I think, to this level that like you've been doing it. It reminds me of this story that happened recently. I came upon a collection locally of a guy that had a ton of signed baseball, basketball, football, you name it. He had signed pieces going all the way back to the 80s. He was a guy that came from Boston. His dad had connections with the Boston Red Sox. He would go and get stuff signed all the time from those Boston teams back in the 80s and early 90s. So he had a ton of stuff, and he even had this like Roberto Clemente signed. It was like a RBI leader. I can't remember what year it was. It was an RBI leaders card of Clemente, Hank Aaron, and Orlando Cepeda. And obviously, as you probably well known, that there aren't very many signed Clemente pieces out there.
Oh yeah.
And he had it raw. He didn't have it like PSA DNA certified or anything like that. But he's like, I've just had it in my collection for decades, and I never wanted to get it like certified because I know it's real. And you come across those pieces a lot if you're wanting to do this on a regular basis. I obviously didn't have any interest in the piece myself, but I knew other collectors that would definitely have interest in a piece like that. So I contacted several people. I had this guy that was like, okay, I'm really interested in it. I want to talk to the guy though, and I want to hear directly from him the story of how he got it. And so I got them connected on a phone conversation. And based off that phone conversation, the guy was he was perfectly fine with purchasing that piece for several thousands of dollars raw, because he was very confident that because he's like, I collect Clemente autographs, I know what they look like, that looks legit. And as long as I hear a good story from the collector, I'm willing to buy it without it being authenticated or anything. So those are things that I feel like if you're doing this to this extent, you're going to come across those things with people just having things in their collection for decades, but they're not going to probably go off and get it authenticated. So it's all about the story. It's all about your knowledge of that particular autograph or just that particular, card or photograph or whatever it is. And yeah, just kind of going with your gut sometimes. And, and
Definitely.
it's a lot of money and it's a lot at stake, but sometimes you have to kind of go put yourself out there for those really truly special pieces like that.
Absolutely. It's a comfort level. And again, sounds like the buyer of that Clemente knew his topic. He knew his realm, knew his space and arena. That's what it's, my brother's the same with Jordan, I've spent countless hours, just because I like it, because I enjoy it, looking at Mantle's signature on his contracts, and how does the 59 signature differ from the 64 signature, and look at the 51 and how he did his M's. I just love that shit, right? Like I admire, I love his story. I love the way he played the game. I love the apex performance he delivered. I love hearing stories from friends of mine who saw him play. And so point being that I do the homework, and I enjoy it. It's fun. It sounds like that guy did that with the Clemente. And so that's how you gain that confidence where you'll know raw. You might know more than some recently trained grader at a grading company, right? It goes for unsigned cards too, right? You can tell, you develop a feel, literally a feel for the cardboard. You could develop a feel for, if I can look at certain issues that I know inside and out, tell right away if it's short or not, just off quick eye glance, right? And I'm like, I think that one's been hit on one side, or you begin to look and you say, I could tell the way that corner was shaped, right? Again, it comes from years and years and years of experience and being hungry for knowledge. The knowledge is out there. The people who have that knowledge, they're out there. Yep. And you seek them out, and you don't even have to pull out of them. A lot of times they're happy to share it with you, and that could make you more knowledgeable than a grader. Certainly.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think so. Well, I think that's a good place to start wrapping up. Is there anything else you wanted to mention about your own collection? Things you've got that you're really proud of, or just things you're still trying to collect out there that you're still searching for that you want people to know about, and hook you up on Instagram if they find anything that you're searching for?
Oh, I like all classic cards, all classic cards. They just can't afford them all. There's just so many, whether it's Ruths or Jacksons or Cobbs or Gehrigs, there's so much. I think one thing that's fun to talk about as we wrap up is, and it's been talked about a ton, is eye appeal. But I mean, it's there are cards that, one thing I was talking about with some fellow collectors today is that there are cards that are beat the system cards, and there are cards that are bow to the system cards or worship the system cards. And I got nothing wrong with a high grade card. It's just got to look the part. right? And what I mean by a beat the system card is there's so many, because the goalposts have shifted, because grading standards have shifted. There's so many beautiful cards that aren't necessarily high grade that there's, pound for pound, they're tremendous fighters, right? And they're great pieces. So I think that that's an important distinction, right? Versus a card that maybe isn't attractive but is high grade. And someone might want to buy it because they're like, well, this is telling me it's the best, right? But what are your eyes telling you? And that dovetails with the notion, I think, that is very um, in deeply ingrained in the hobby DNA is this notion of what's best and what's finest, and this is the best, and this is the. I think that really needs some talking about, because there is no one definitive bow down to this is the best, right?
Yep.
There's not, because even if you have a perfect 10 of a card that is a 10 and looks like a 10, is a 10, is 10, is 10, you might be, someone else's version of best might be finding that same card in a cheaper 9 holder because pound for pound they won. They feel like that's better. Someone may say, no, I want to find the lowest grade card that also satisfies my eye because that's tremendous value. Some people it may be a sign card, some people it may not be, some people it may be one player, some people may hate that player. There's never going to be the hobby. There's, in some quarters of the hobby, there's such a desire, it serves no utility to kind of aggregate and homogenize and say, this is the best, and that's just not the case. It's sometimes it's people wanting other people to want to buy what they have, so their stuff goes up in value. I think that's very common, transparent motivation. Sometimes it's I think I've seen it a lot with the registry type collectors that are saying this is the number one finest. Well, not to me because it's ugly, but that's just me. If it's to you, it's great. So it's this notion of really, really getting off of this whole what is best. I think that's very freeing. It creates a more collegial, um, amicable atmosphere and energy,
Yeah.
and just acknowledging that as many collectors as there are going to be as many definition of what is best. All that matters is that the collector's happy. And what it should be about is different. And this is in a dream. This is what Instagram and hobby social media would be. It's just collectors sharing. Here's what I collect. Here's why I collect it. Here's why I love it. Here's why I think it's beautiful. That's sharing real information and expertise. And if that's the kind of thing that the content, that's content, then the overall quality of the discourse and the quality of the content and the quality of the information circulating is going to really become elevated. And that's on all of us.
Absolutely. Well, really well said. Absolutely. Yeah, there are a lot of collectors can't help but be really competitive out there, especially when it comes to the said registries. They get especially competitive.
Yeah.
The top cards and the top registries, and I get it. And some of it can be kind of fun, but it is a competitive game with a lot of people. And yeah, don't get too drawn in with the competitiveness in this hobby, and don't get too drawn in with people on Instagram that are posting like $100,000 cards on a regular basis, and feel like you have to emulate that or have the same type of collection in your collection. No, please don't fall for it. Just start collecting things you love and then build up your collection over time until you can maybe one day have some of those pieces that you're probably seeing other people have on Instagram and YouTube and whatnot. It'll happen one day.
Yeah, it's not about the value. It's about, again, like there's certain accounts I follow and cards I love to look at that are not pricey. Then there are other pieces that I admire tremendously and would love to own that are. The common denominator among all those collections is that it's a collector sharing. Here's what I love. Here's what I collect. Here's why. That's that's what that person loves and think is best. Here's what this other guy loves and thinks is best. And I'm learning, right? And maybe seeing cards I've slept on, cards I remember and have forgotten, cards I don't know about that I'm now learning about. That's I think quality interaction and
Yep.
quality engagement with fellow collectors.
Yep. Absolutely. So speaking of interaction, is there anything else people can find you on besides Instagram, or is Instagram the primary?
That's for hobby. Yeah, for hobby, that's as far as I'll go.
All right.
It's a great distraction, though. It really is. You know, it's a great distraction from work for sure.
Yeah. Well, once again, that is MattyC, as in the MattyC Collection on Instagram. Matt, thank you so much for coming on and doing this interview. It's a real pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, man, definitely.